Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and the day has finally come that I'm going to review the tank with the joint highest alpha damage in the game. It's the FV215b183. The FV215b183 has a semi-traversable turret which makes it one of the most flexible tank destroyers at tier 10. In addition, the vehicle's fairly thick armor and rear-mounted turret allows it to sidescrape very effectively, bouncing shells and returning fire. And with 1750 average damage on its shells, it can literally one-shot many of the vehicles it meets. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, stick around. I've got some ace tanker gameplay coming right up, and if you have no interest in picking up the tier 10 British tank destroyer, then I'll give you some tips and tricks as to how to take them out effectively on the battlefield. So let's compare the FV215b183 to its tier 10 British tank destroyer counterpart, the FV4005 stage 2, and also the rather hard-hitting tier 10 German tank destroyer, the Jagdpanzer E100. Now you might be wondering why I have a second FV215b183 down here, and that's because I'm going to change the ammunition from standard to the premium HESH that the FV215b183 gets, which really is the speciality of this tank. While the standard armor-piercing rounds on the FV215b183 have got 1150 alpha damage and 310mm of penetration, which sounds very impressive indeed, the HESH rounds, while they've only got 230 penetration, have 1750 alpha damage. And so when we're comparing the armaments of these tanks, then we're going to have to also include the HESH rounds into our discussion. So immediately we can see with standard ammunition, the tier 10 British tank destroyers have got 5% less DPM than the Jagdpanzer E100, but thankfully, due to the caliber of the shell increasing from 170 to 183mm, the penetration goes up from 299 to 310. And the significance of that 11mm increase means that now these 183mm caliber monster armor-piercing shells can overmatch armor of 100mm. This means that any armor plate that is 100mm and less will be simply overmatched by the large caliber shell of the FV215b183, irrelevant of going above 70 degrees of armor angling, which is something very significant to consider when you're engaging an FV215b183, that sidescraping, if you don't have over 100mm of side armor, is not the correct solution. The vehicle's average damage on its standard armor-piercing rounds is 1150. That is enough to take off half the hit points of pretty much all vehicles apart from a handful that you're going to meet, and also enough to one-shot many tier 8 tank destroyers and even some tier 8 medium tanks if you roll high. And it does feel like a significant advantage over the 1050 average damage that the Jagdpanzer E100 has. But while the vehicle's alpha damage is awesome, its rate of fire is awful. 2 rounds a minute, meaning you're going to be reloading for 30 seconds before you take into account things like crew skills and whether you choose to use a gun rammer on the tank. And so this means that if you see an FV215b183 fire, you have to push the tempo, you have to try and track it, try and get its side, try and shoot it multiple times before it's reloaded and ready to probably finish off the remaining 50% of hit points that you'll have. Next on to another weakness of the FV215b183, and that's how much ammunition it can carry. It can only carry 12 rounds into the battle, meaning that you're going to have to give careful consideration as to how many armor-piercing and high explosive squashed head rounds that you're going to take in this vehicle. And I should further clarify that those rounds are indeed very expensive. The standard shell cost on this tank is 2,250 per shot, but if you elect to fire the premium rounds that this tank has, it is 8,000 credits a shot, but that's the only way to buy yourself into getting 1750 alpha damage, right? So what about the tank's weapon handling? Well, it's not good news here. 3.4 seconds aim time means that you are gonna have to have a lot of time if you want to be fully accurate to hit your targets. And even when you're fully aimed, you're still not going to be that accurate because your accuracy is 0.4 base, which is 0.05 worse than the Jagdpanzer E100, and its aim time is way worse, 0.7 seconds worse. Next up, more bad news when we look at the dispersion values that this tank gets: 0.26 while moving, 0.26 while turning the tank, and 0.4 while turning the turret. Compare that to the Jagdpanzer E100 and you'll see why the 183 just has to aim for so long at its opponents. And when we compare this to its tier 10 British tank destroyer counterpart, the FV4005, we see that the vehicle has got 0.4 seconds less aim time, 0.02 more accurate. It has much worse dispersion while moving, but much better dispersion while turning the turret. Meaning that as long as the FV4005 stage 2 is not moving and only turning its turret, it has pretty okay aim time time for such a large caliber gun, at least compared to the FV215b 183. Next up, more disappointing news, the vehicle doesn't really have very much gun depression at all. 5 degrees, that's 1 degree worse than the Jagdpanzer E100. So how about the movement? Well, 34 kilometers an hour forwards is rather okay for such a large tank with a big gun, and also goes at 12 kilometers an hour backwards, a lot like the Jagdpanzer E100. The specific power ratio of the FV215b 183 does look rather impressive. In fact, if you were to not know about the hidden terrain resistances, you would think that the FV215b 183 was faster than the FV4005 Stage 2, and that it would indeed run rings around the Jagdpanzer's awful power-to-weight ratio of less than 9. However, when we take into account the terrain resistances which Wargaming don't show you into the garage, we can see why the FV215b is so much slower than the FV4005 Stage 2, and that's because it's got awful terrain resistances, 1.8 on hard, 2 on medium and 3 on soft. Significantly worse than the 1 that the FV405 Stage 2 gets, the 1.1 that the Jagdpanzer gets, the 1.3 that they both get on medium, and the 1.9 and 2.3 respectively that they get on soft. And so these two things balance themselves out, meaning that the FV4005 Stage 2 is by far the fastest tank in this comparison, followed by the FV215b, and then really the Jagdpanzer quite close to the FV215b. Something that you wouldn't consider if you only compared the power to weight ratio alone. Turret traverse wise, the 183 is better than the Stage 2, 4 degrees better to be exact. And even though the Jagdpanzer looks like it has a great turret traverse, remember that it doesn't have a very wide gun arc at all on the tank. But don't be tricked by the Jagdpanzer E100 having 26 degrees a second turret traverse, and that's because it can only traverse its turret 8 degrees to the left and 8 degrees to the right, whereas the FV215b 183 with that semi-traversable turret has a massive gun arc, 45 degrees to the left and 45 degrees to the right, making this vehicle very flexible and also a fantastic side scraper. So how about the armor on the 183? Well, it's got 152mm at the front, 50 at the side and 76 at the rear, with 254 on the turret, 177 on the side of the turret, and 31 at the rear of the turret. Now, of course, this is way better than probably some of the worst armor that there is in the game that's on the FV4005 Stage 2. 14mm on all of the turret. If you want a good laugh, just shoot one of these tanks and you're... How can you miss that absolute fat-headed tank? You can fire anything that you want at this vehicle and it's pretty much going to overmatch it at tier 8. And don't even get started about how much of an easy shot this is for the artillery. Well, in comparison, the 183's armor is rather nice, actually. Here we can see all across this part of the tank that it ranges from 250 up to about 300mm plus of effective armor. Above the gun shield, still about 240mm of effective armor, which can pull off a ricochet. And outside of the cheeks, we can see some really nice angling here, 203mm of armor, angled at 63 degrees, that's 400mm of effective if it's facing you directly, and outside that, anywhere up from 375 to 400. There is a flat top bar across the front of the tank, as we can see here, however, that still has about 236mm of penetration. And if you're using the 5 degrees of gun depression this tank gets, then the top of the turret gets even better, as we can see here, up to about 300. So you shouldn't be worried about showing your turret to your opponents in the FV215b 183. And if the enemy FV is using its turret armor with its 5 degrees of gun depression, you're probably not best to take shots at the turret unless you're willing to fire premium rounds at it or try and hit the top bar on the tank. As we can see, however, if the vehicle is not using its gun depression, or even if you're slightly above the FV215b 183, this whole upper plate here of 127mm does become quite an easy shot for pretty much any tier 8 plus vehicle. Just don't be tempted whatsoever, irrelevant of the elevation or depression angles, to shoot the cheeks, as they will be an auto ricochet, unless of course you do get the side of the tank like this, and then they do become quite an easy shot to penetrate. With regards to the hull armor, 152mm on the upper plate, ranging to about 225mm of effective protection, depending on how well he's going to angle it. And the lower plate is a great opportunity for all vehicles. Look at this, even if he's angling it as far as this, it's still only 110mm of effective armor. And as soon as you get the side of this vehicle at this kind of an angle, he's just gone. With its rear mounted turret and OK 150mm of side armor, the FV215b183 can be quite nice for side scraping. Angled like this, you have 76mm on the side of your track, and this should be safe against all vehicles apart from 155mm caliber guns. And as we can see here, you can still manage to get your gun around the corner without exposing your very weak lower plate. And if you see the enemy doing this to you, don't be tempted to shoot the side of the tank along the tracks. That's really not going to go well for you. You either want to shoot it above the turret here if you have the penetration, or alternatively, a lot like the standard FV215b, i.e. the British Tier 10 heavy tank, there is a lovely little notch that we can see in the part of the vehicle here that will not have very much angling, only 55 degrees and only 100mm of effective armor. So every tank can penetrate if you can see this area here. Although unfortunately, unlike the standard British heavy, there are these boxes on front of the tank that do disguise this. But if he is side scraping and you have no opportunity to shoot the top of the turret, shoot the center of the box and you should be able to hit this weak unangled plate. Health wise, the 183 has 150 more hit points than the Stage 2, but 200 hit points less than the Jagdpanzer E100. View range 390 meters is very nice indeed. The vehicle does have some rather low camo rating, but at least it's a hell of a lot better than the Stage 2. So how about equipment and crew skills in the FV215b183? Well, number one, take a large caliber tank gun rammer because it increases your rate of fire by 10% and you'd be an idiot to not have one. Next, I'd say there's probably about 3 remaining competitive choices in the FV215b183. Firstly, it's vents. Secondly, it's a gun laying drive, considering this vehicle does have 3.4 seconds aim time, some of the worst in the game. And finally, coated optics, because it's always nice to be able to see your opponents before you can shoot at them right. Personally, for me, I'd probably drop the coated optics on this tank because I like to always get myself into close quarters combat with this vehicle, where the very poor accuracy and the poor aim time don't really matter as much, and I can pinpoint those weak points on the enemy tank where hopefully I can penetrate them with the 230mm of HESH penetration that I have. So crew skills wise, you want to be taking repairs on all of your crew first. Then when your commander reaches 100%, take 6 cents and then continue to train repairs. When you break into your third skill, that means now you can take 6 cents and brothers in arms on all of your crew and then be training repairs again on your commander. For your gunner, I think it's definitely worthwhile to be taking snapshot on this vehicle to try and reduce the aim time that you have when you're turning the turret. Next up on your driver, I prefer to use clutch braking, although there's an argument to also be using off-road driving on this vehicle. And finally, on your loaders, it's really simple. Just be taking a safe stowage, learn repairs, and then start to try and improve the camo on your tank, or if you elect to not use a fire extinguisher and instead using something like pudding and tea, you might want to take firefighting instead. And maybe on your second loader, you might want to be taking intuition or even adrenaline rush. Intuition could be rather useful on this tank because it does feel rather awkward when you might need a HESH round to be able to pull off an ambush shot, but I still feel like it's too much of a risk to be able to change to instantly reload an AP round instead of a HESH round, for example, because you could end up reloading for 25 seconds anyway, even with good crew skills and good equipment. But I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's go and get some one-shots. So this was a round that I actually played while I was streaming live from Gamescom. As we can see, there's actually a Gamescom account on the enemy team. And you might see also my chosen ammo loadout with the FV215b183. I load 9 HESH rounds, 3 armor-piercing rounds, and just to let you know, the HESH rounds alone, that will cost 72,000 credits. Remember, each shot, 8,000 credits worth. But to be fair, I don't think there's any other reason to really play this tank other than to fire HESH, really. I mean, the vehicle can do very, very well with its armor-piercing rounds, there's no doubt, and I'm going to show you how well they do also in this replay. And if you're so inclined and you don't run a premium account, or you just don't really want to waste the credits, or you have a problem with firing premium rounds, then you can fire the standard armor-piercing and still do okay. But I don't know, I usually play this as a bit of a stream highlight kind of moment, and the HESH rounds are just absolutely hilarious. Wow, doesn't look like that Gamescom account lasted very long on the enemy team, and oh gosh, there's an Oni. Hold on, you're not meant to be in this matchup. Who did you sign up with? He signed up with a Bulldog, did he? Or a T-54 lightweight? Oh well, let's just send him back to the garage so he can pick a real tank to play against tier 10 vehicles. Hey guys, 1,550 damage done to that poor little tier 7 Japanese heavy tank. And really, that's what the FV215b183 does best. It one-shots things, and then it spends a little while reloading. Now remember, these Hesh rounds have got 230 millimeters of penetration, and so trying to penetrate 230 millimeters of penetration against, for example, this mouse is rather tricky. I'm trying to aim for his lower plate. Will I get it? I don't quite manage to penetrate his lower plate, but we still do 553 damage to him. And that might surprise you. If you don't know about Hesh mechanics, they work pretty much exactly like high explosive rounds with higher penetration. And just ignore the battle ends in 2 minutes. That's because Wargaming servers were having an absolute mare at the moment, and we're going to see quite a big lag spike in just a minute. So now I've elected to fire an AP round, the standard ammunition. Remember, 310 millimeters of penetration. Goodbye, mouse. That's not a bad roll. 1,150 average on these AP rounds, and I rolled for 1,254. But that round only cost me 2,250 credits. Pretty much about a quarter of the price of the premium Hesh rounds, I should say. And when you do manage to penetrate those AP rounds, you can definitely feel the cost benefit kind of thing compared to the Hesh rounds, where you literally are just whiffing money at the target. My first round did what? 550 damage and cost me 8,000 credits. My next one does 1,254, kills the mouse, and costs me a quarter of the price. So now we're going to be gunning for these tier 9 tank destroyers. But unfortunately, the game is going to go through quite a significant lag spike in just a second. Or maybe it's not. Who to shoot? Yeah, there's the lag spike. So this lasted for about 5 seconds, and at Gamescom I was like, oh god. Has somebody dropped my connection? This is rather awkward, but luckily enough, it's going to come back in just a second, and it looks like the entirety of the server was lagging, and luckily it wasn't just me. And just look at this anticipation, guys. We have a Hesh round loaded. Okay, we're back in the game. Find the Yak Tiger. 1,789 damage done to the Yak Tiger. Guys, we fired 4 rounds this game now, right? And we've done 5,146 damage. Unfortunately, we can see here the servers are still lagging. Or is this just like a normal game? Everybody's trying to grind back into each other. Finally, the game ends. I think well, not the game ends. The siren sounds. The game doesn't actually end. And I think we're all back in it, ready to play again, momentarily. Okay. To be honest, this was like one of the first times in thousands of games that I've actually had a problem with Wargaming servers. It just had to be for one of the ones where I have actually had a very good game in the FV215b 183. Hey, there's one of those brand new Scorpions, hey? Goodbye. What an unnecessary amount of credits I spent on that. 8,000 credits to do 583 damage. That's rather painful. But the problem is because your reload is so long, once you've kind of decided that you're going to be loading those Hesh rounds in the tank, you can't suddenly decide that you want to fire an AP round. I guess you could use the intuition perk on this tank if you were so inclined, and you absolutely had to take that risk to have to then have a 30-second reload just to be able to save yourself a little bit. So 894 damage done there to the T30. In retrospect, I probably should have loaded an AP round as soon as I fired at the Scorpion on the enemy team, and now you see me doing exactly that. We're loading an AP round because I don't really want to waste any more of the Hesh rounds. But oh god, this Skoda on the enemy team, he's got 1,650 hit points. Oh, I really wish I was loading the Hesh round right now. And really, that's one of the big dilemmas that you will have when you play the FV215b 183. You won't be able to decide which ammunition type you should be loading. Should you be loading the round that costs you 8,000 credits, or should you be loading the round that costs you 2,250? Irrelevant. We still hit the Skoda. We do 1,301 damage to him with our standard round. I hasten to add, that is like a plus... What is that? That's like a plus 20% roll nearly with the 1,150. Well, sorry, only about a plus 10-12% roll off the standard rounds, which usually do 1,150 damage. But if we'd been firing Hesh, we would have probably been able to take him out there and pick up a top gun and push our damage total to over 8,000. So great result in the FV215b. That was an ace tanker and also my second mark of excellence, a high caliber medal, unsurprisingly, for the just shy of 8,000 damage that we dealt. 7 shots fired, 7 hits, 7 penetrations, 5 kills, and if we hadn't been so cheap, we probably would have picked up the 6th there at the end on that tier 9 Czechoslovakian medium tank. But because we were cheap and we fired that AP round, we actually ended up making 20,000 credits profit, even though we fired 44,500 credits of ammunition. Really, if you want to play this tank at its optimum capabilities, you are going to hemorrhage credits even with a premium account playing this tank. It really isn't all that often that you get the opportunities to fire full HESH penetrations into enemy tanks, and also have every single one of your shots fly exactly where you aimed them. And really, the painful credit-losing shots in the FV215b 183 are the ones where you take chancy shots at mid to long ranges and you miss 8,000 credits into the dirt, into the ridgeline, into the rocks, and oh, it's just so frustrating and painful. But if literally one-shotting tanks is your kind of thing, then you probably want to look no further. And talking about one-shotting tanks, I don't think this would be a full FV215b 183 tank review if I gave you a few more in quick succession. And so there you have it, that is the FV215b 183 in a nutshell. It's really not the most complicated of tanks. It isn't fast enough to be able to outflank your opponents. It doesn't really have complicated armor, just avoid getting shot in the lower plate, try to sidescrape when you can. Your turret armor can be relied upon, but certainly is fallible. The gun doesn't fire fast enough really to be getting involved in the combat, have to track your opponents, lock them in place, and then be able to try and surround them. And unlike other hard hitters, for example the Jagdpanzer E100, there's no real need to learn how to angle your armor super effectively to try and mitigate certain weaknesses. What the FV215b 183 does do exceedingly well is just devastate its opponents, either with its armor-piercing ammunition, or preferably if you can manage to penetrate with the 230mm of penetration that it has, the HESH rounds. But if you do want to play like that often and more than maybe a couple of games a night, then you better be running a premium account and probably having a premium tank to be able to afford the credits to go in the vehicle. Which I guess in conclusion kind of makes this vehicle one of the few truly pay-to-win tanks in the game. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this tank review, or maybe it was just useful to you. If it was, please consider giving the video a like, it really helps the channel out. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you soon.